G'day everyone, welcome. First of all, we have Madeleine Rothberg, and she'll be talking about accessibility in large-scale curriculum projects. Over to you.
Thank you. I'm Madeleine Rothberg. I'm visiting today from Toronto, Canada, where I live, but I actually work in Boston, Massachusetts, which is the home of WGBH, which is a public broadcasting station, much like your ABC. WGBH has a long history in accessibility. We invented the notion of captioning for television over 45 years ago. And we've since moved forward with bringing captioning to the web, creating descriptive video for television and the web, and now we work in all kinds of media and technology accessibility. So today I'm going to speak to you about some of our educational accessibility projects. And for the most part, I'm going to speak about a project called Bringing the Universe to America's Classrooms. Bringing the Universe to America's Classrooms is a collection of curriculum materials for K-12 schools produced by WGBH in our educational technology group and in collaboration with NASA, with funding from NASA. So we've got lots of marvelous resources from NASA, and we're using them in the context of science education to teach core disciplinary ideas, so the basics of earth science and space science, but in the context of the science practices that engage students in making their own discoveries and observations. So it's all contextualized and supported for teachers. The media we use include a lot of work on analyzing data visualizations, making observations. So those of you who's been working in accessibility will getting a little ping of the foreshadowing of some of the kinds of work we're going to need to do to make this accessible. And all these materials are made available in a site called PBS Learning Media, which is a huge library of educational media, all of them free. Nearly all of them are available worldwide. And in fact, we checked the stats, and Australians are the third largest users of PBS Learning Media after US and Canada. Most of the resources are available without restriction. There's a small amount who have, where there's a US content rights requirement that won't allow you to stream it. But most of the materials can be and is, in fact, being used by Australian teachers right now. The Universe collection offers a lot of support for teachers. We have guidance videos on how to work with the tools. We have a set of teacher advisors who are working closely with the project, so they tell us what will work for teachers in classrooms, and they tried out our materials early on and gave us feedback before we got too far along, and we continue to work with our teacher advisors. Each piece of material has a lot of context to support teachers who might be new to teaching with digital media, because we know that not all teachers are comfortable yet in the digital world, and so we want to help them get started and discover how it can benefit their students. We're currently in year 2 of the project, and we've released 7 earth science modules. So these are all available online. Some of the accessibility pieces we're just putting the finishing touches on as they come online. It's all available at pbslearningmedia.org/universe. And so we sort the resources into grade bands. So we've got materials focused at K2, at 3 to 5, middle school, and high school. And we're covering weather, climate, land and water forms, the story of our Earth, and materials like that for this year in earth science. The shape of our resources is what we call a module. So we've come up with the collaboration of our teacher advisors with the concept of a module focused on a single topic. And in that module, we have a set of purposefully curated resources. They support the next generation science standards, and they support the engagement and exploration goals of the science criteria. And each module consists of a group of standalone resources, some lesson plans that lay out step-by-step for teachers proposed lessons. There are student-facing interactive lessons that walk a student through a set of activities, professional development materials for the teachers, and very importantly, supports for diverse learners and English learners. So diverse learners, for the most part, means students with disabilities, and that's my role in the project, is to support those goals. And we're also working with English language learning consultants to provide additional supports for students learning English, some of which also, of course, may be useful to students with disabilities as well. Our accessibility goal is to have everything be fully Section 508 compliant, fully accessible, pedagogically appropriate. But when we work at this scale, you find that there are some things that are hard to do. So for example, we're working with a lot of materials from NASA. There's dozens of videos and images and animations, and some of them were made by NASA before accessibility became a common feature of their work. And so we received them without the accessibility features that they need. And we had to make some decisions about how we could manage our budget and our resources to produce the best experience we could for students with disabilities. So the decision that we made is that everything in a lesson plan would be entirely accessible. So if a resource is important enough to be placed into the sequence of lessons that we're recommending to teachers, we would ensure that those resources lacked no accessibility that we could provide. For the resources outside of that, in the standalone resources that are not in the lesson plan, all the videos are captioned and all the images have image descriptions. Those are affordable and reasonable accommodations, and so we do that for everything. And wherever possible, we add other kinds of accessibility to those standalone resources. For example, all of our Word files that we provide as teacher and student handouts, we're making sure that we structure the Word files to be accessible. We're not using PDF, both for accessibility concerns and because our teachers told us that a Word file honestly is easier for them to work with in many ways than a PDF. In some cases, we are making education accessible without making a single resource accessible. So even, especially within the standalone resources, if there's a standalone resource that is the key way that a certain concept is going to be taught, even if it's outside of the lesson plan, we did our best to make that accessible. And alternatively, inside the lesson plan, if there's a resource that can't be made accessible in its kind of in its default presentation, we sometimes went to an alternate activity or an alternate resource in order to create the educational experience that we're looking for all students, even if we couldn't make them some resources accessible for especially blind students. Some of the resources that we're using, images, of course, slideshows, videos, games, and the interactive lessons that I mentioned. And so here's a scattering of some of the images. We've got this year focusing on earth science. We have stunning views of the earth from above, including sequences of images showing the way a delta gets deposited at the mouth of a river, visuals of landforms, of the ocean, animations of data that's been collected about the earth, and then actually some really fun games, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. So let's look at some of these resources and what kinds of accessibility we're offering for them. Images, of course. Images get alternative text, and images get long description. So we started by training our science writers on how to write image description. We've done a lot of research at NCAM on how to make images accessible, and we offer a free set of guidelines online called Effective Practices for STEM Description. So if you're looking for guidance on how to write a good image description, I recommend that resource. But one of the things that we believe in is that the description is best written by the people who know the content and know why that content was selected. So the science writers who are assembling these lessons under the guidance of experienced educators are the ones who are themselves writing the image descriptions for the lessons they're putting together. So we trained them in image description techniques, and then we work with them as they create their descriptions. We have some review and some monitoring to make sure that the descriptions are all going to be as useful as possible. We've got the short ones and we've got the long ones. Implementing long description on the web, if you've been doing this for any amount of time, you know that this is the problem that will not go away. So our current solution involves ARIA described by, and then we're also hiding the text. I think at the moment they've got it in like a 0-point transparent font. And that was something that the technologists came up with that I had never considered. We usually position things off screen and don't worry about what color it is. But that was their solution, was make the text invisible, but it's there. So this means that when a student using a screen reader pops open an image, they have access to a complete description. And here's just a little sample. The image is, well, I can read it to you. The 5 major climate zones on the map. This is a map showing the 5 major climate zones in the United States, and the 5 major climate zones are indicated with a key. A represents tropical climates, which includes just the southern tip of Florida. B represents the dry climates, and so on. So it's a very long description, as long descriptions are wont to be. When you've got a lot of information, an image, you don't have a choice. You have to share it all. We are, of course, working with lots of videos. So we're going to be, this video is a more traditional one, and I'm going to show you in a moment. It's got captions and it has audio description. It's for a younger student audience, and so it's not the most complex description we've ever done, but I wanted to point out a couple of things that you'll hear going on in this video. So let's see, how do I do this?
A title, Snow. Flurries swirl around several cars as they proceed slowly along an icy street. Clumps of snow cling to a fir tree's prickly branches. In a forest, snow pelts a small tree's brown leaves.
So a couple of things you might have heard in this video. One is that you can't tell because I didn't show you the original, but we had to extend the video in order to add audio description to this video. And on first blush, you might not think it's important because there's not a lot of talking, and you could just talk over the sound effects. And in audio description for a drama or a history show, you might talk over some of the sound effects. But in this case, the sound effects are really the most interesting part of the video, especially for a student with a visual impairment. The hearing the sound of how that weather is impacting the place that's being shown, I felt was an important factor. And so we chose to use extended audio description. We actually had to freeze frame the video to add in the audio description so that the environmental sounds could come through loud and clear. And it makes for, I hope, a more enjoyable experience for the students and a chance for them to hear and maybe connect to sounds they've heard in their own lives when they walked down a street and heard the cars going by or heard the snow falling on a leaf. So we've got also more traditional audio description for older grades. There's an amazing video about the skyline of Manhattan and how the geology of the area influenced the skyline. And for that, we were able to use traditional description, slip it in the pauses, and it works great. We also created some new videos, especially for this project. And so this opened up the possibility of doing things a little bit differently. On the left is a still from a video from a TV series we produced called Peep. Peep is a little yellow bird, and his friend Chirp is a little red bird. And we have a whole science series for young children based around these characters and their friend Quack. Quack is a large purple duck. So for these new Peep videos we were creating, we had a meeting with the science team and the Peep team, and we said, wouldn't it be great if we didn't need to create a described version of this video? We're making it from scratch. Maybe Peep could say, wow, I feel the wind as those leaves blow by my head. And then we wouldn't need a describer saying, leaves blow by Peep's head. And the Peep writers put their foot down right away. They said, that's not the voice of our show. That's not how our characters talk. Our characters say, "we," and nobody if you can't see, you don't know why they're saying "we," and they weren't interested in changing the voice of the characters for this show. And I respect that because that's a piece of what makes the show work for young children. They have a lot of experience writing television for young children, and we weren't going to override that. So we said, okay, we'll find the budget and we'll use traditional audio description. And so the new Peep videos that we created all have traditional audio description, some of them with extended description where we couldn't get in enough between the wonderful sound effects. And so if you visit the site, you'll find those described videos there, and we'll tell you that Peep is a little yellow bird, and Chirp is a little red bird, and Quack is a big purple duck. And they're very funny, so if you are childlike or know small children, the Peep videos are a ton of fun. The other kind of videos that were new for this project are live children videos. So we've got this video here shows a caption that says, I'm making a treasure hunt for Oliver. And it's a picture of a young girl with a paper and pencil. And in the video, she walks around her yard and she hides something and she makes a little map for her friend to walk around and find the treasure. And again, we thought at first, well, the kids talk really descriptively. Maybe we won't need audio description here. But no, you're filming live children. They're saying what they say. I'm not sure how scripted they were, but it's relatively real life. And so traditional audio description was the way to go here as well. Another kind of video that we have a lot in this project are silent videos, and these are mostly used in the older age groups as data visualizations. So I'm going to play this silent video, and I'll probably talk over it since there is no sound, and then we'll talk a little bit about making it more accessible. So the video shows the Atlantic Ocean, the North Atlantic Ocean, with the coastlines of North America and Europe, and there are white squiggles all over the surface of the ocean, and they are moving. Are they moving? Yes. They're moving slowly. There's little white lines wiggling and moving around. And if you were trying to do your science assignment based on what I just said, you would be completely out of luck. So we knew we needed to do something about these silent videos. We felt that it would not be effective to use audio description because these are resources where students are going to need to go back and consult and compare. There's actually the first half of the video is the surface of the ocean, and the second half is in the deep ocean. And then there's another resource, which is the whole ocean, the global ocean, as opposed to just the North Atlantic. And students are asked to do some really deep investigation working with these materials. Audio description was not going to work here. And because the video is silent, there is actually no need to present the version for blind students at the same time as the version for sighted students. The experiences can be entirely decoupled. So what we decided we needed was, in essence, a really long description. And so we're delivering, you can't really deliver a long description on a video through HTML. So we're delivering those in Word documents. So we have a Word document for this whole lesson. It covers all the video variants that are there. And it has a whole paragraph for each video. And so we took all our best image description techniques. We're going for brevity, clarity, consistency, and data. Those are our 4 watchwords for image description. And it's the same here. We want to be consistent in the order of sentences as we describe the different portions so that students can move back and forth and compare. We want to be as brief as possible, but not too brief, and we want to be very clear. And we want to focus on the data because that's what the students need to do their assignment. So we crafted these detailed descriptions. We're delivering them in what we hope will be a useful, accessible format. We'll check in with our teacher advisors, those who have students with disabilities. And if this technique isn't the right one, then we'll adjust it and we'll move on. But I think for now, this is probably the best we're going to do in making these kinds of silent videos accessible. We have a couple of games in this year's release in 2 of the units, and there'll be more to come. One of them we needed to make an accessible alternate. So this is a video game that's based in a 3D engine called Unity, and you're like wandering around on a landscape and you're using your arrow keys to navigate, and you're looking at the landforms and you're collecting little blobs of trash and getting points for them. In theory, it could be made accessible to screen reader users, and I know we're going to talk a lot about games this afternoon. But we had to think about the trade-off between the effort it would take to make this game screen reader accessible and the learning experience. And we felt that the learning experience to be gotten out of this game for a screen reader user was just not going to justify an intensive effort to make the game itself accessible. The goal is for the students to learn about different landforms, lakes and rivers and hills and volcanoes. It's a very interesting island. It has a volcano. And so we chose instead to make an accessible alternate. The accessible alternate is built in our student interactive lesson platform. And if you can read that tiny little text in the turquoise bar, it says something like page 1 of 32. So this is a very long lesson because what it does is it steps through every major thing you would do if you were playing the game. But it puts them in a format where the navigation is straightforward, the image descriptions can be embedded in HTML instead of trying to figure out how to deliver image description inside a 3D game engine. And it delivers the content in an easier way than trying to adapt the 3D Explorer game. On the other hand, we have another game which we were able to make accessible by design. And this is called Rough Ruffman's Terrific Travel Blog. Rough Ruffman is another TV show of ours. It's a science and engineering show for sort of upper elementary, middle kids. And it's a very funny character with a distinctive comedic voice. And his grandmother also appears. She's a hoot. And the theme of the game is that Ruff has written a travel blog for his grandmother all about earthquakes and volcanoes, and she's off exploring the Ring of Fire. And it turns out that there are a lot of errors in his information. So the students are asked to read emails from grandma where she chews him out for having errors, and then read the resource materials, learn a lot about volcanoes and earthquakes, and find the correct answers to some of the questions. So this game is built entirely in HTML, and we made it fully keyboard and screen reader accessible. It has lots of audio built in, and so the audio has text on screen as well, so it's captioned. There's a little bit of potential for conflict between the audio and the screen reader, so we put in a warning up front that every time you start a new page, Ruff's going to talk to you, and you should just wait till Ruff is done talking before you try to do anything else. That's true for all students, not just those using screen readers. But once you get used to the rhythm of that and listening to the audio files, and you can work through the game and enjoy the entire experience from a screen reader, from the keyboard, with or without hearing. And it's very funny, and if you are interested in volcanoes and earthquakes, or you know any young people who are, I recommend it highly. We also have a series of interactive activities, and these are little match games, or match it, arrange it, write it, visualize it. And these are sort of just little tools that we add into lessons for specific ideas. So pictured on the screen is a match it game where you've got children in different clothing and then pictures of the 4 seasons, and you drag and drop the student to the season that their clothing is appropriate for. And on the left is a drawing activity for older students. A lot of the drawing activities are for little kids, but this one actually is a map of the Earth showing the salinity of the ocean in different parts in the ocean. And the activity is to circle the places on Earth with the most saline ocean. So we had to get creative again for some of these resources. The Match It game we made fully keyboard and screen reader accessible. It's within scope to be able to navigate a small number of objects onto a small number of targets, and it's reasonable for the editorial staff to write those image descriptions to make that work. The Arrange It game, though, was going to be a little too over the top. So I should have put a picture of it. There's an Arrange It, as just one example, that's about the solar system, where we've got a list of all the planets, and then we have it's kind of like a Venn diagram on steroids. So you've got different ways of arranging the planets to show which ones are large and gaseous, and which ones are small and rocky, and which ones are cold, and which ones are hot. And you have to navigate quite a complicated visual array to put every planet in the right spot. So could we have made that screen reader accessible? Yeah. The navigation mechanics would have been the same as Match It. But then the editorial work, in order to provide an accurate description of each target spot, we felt that not only would it be a whole lot of work, that in the end it wouldn't be pedagogically appropriate. We were concerned that it would have visual bias, that the cognitive overload would be extreme. And so given that many of the Arrange It activities were going to have that kind of cognitive overload concern, we didn't make that activity as a whole accessible for screen reader users. We did make it keyboard accessible because a sighted keyboard user can manage it just fine. And instead, we offer alternate activities. So once we had this idea that we would need alternate activities, we said, aha, here's what we need. We need a file upload button. So we created a file upload button that we use on a number of the tools so that students can download an alternate activity, fill it out in a word processor, and upload it. We also have a tool called Write It. It's like a mini word processor built into the lesson. We think that some students will want to use that, and we did make it keyboard accessible. We think that probably a lot of students, whether they have disabilities or not, might have a word processor on their computer that they can use just fine, and particularly for a blind student, they'd rather use a tool that they're already familiar with than learn some new built-in word processor for one activity. So we enabled lesson downloads and file uploads to support a more accessible experience for those writing activities. So here's where we are on our timeline. It is a 5-year project. We spent the first year prototyping and doing needs assessments. And then in 2017, we produced the Earth modules. We also participated in the solar eclipse campaign, which was very exciting for North America to have an eclipse that went across our whole continent. And next year, we'll be producing modules on space. So we'll use a lot of the same techniques that we've created this year and refined. Probably we'll meet some new activities and some new challenges, so that'll be fun. And we'll churn out a whole lot of space content. In 2019, we'll be producing modules on engineering and technology. I would imagine we'll have some simulation issues when we get there, so that'll be fun. And then finally, in our 5th year in 2020, we'll be researching the success of these materials for teacher and student engagement. We'll be thinking about how to scale up and doing some evaluation. So that's everything I have to say about that project. And am I at 5 minutes? Okay, I'm almost done, and then hopefully we'll have a minute or two for questions. I want to give you a very quick sneak peek at another project I'm working on that is not yet public. Working again with the PEEP characters and resources, we're doing some research on using traditional disability accommodations with other disability groups. So we've always had anecdotal evidence that suggests that captions might be useful for students who have trouble focusing, or that audio description might be useful for students with autism to help them concentrate on the visual lessons being taught in a screen, and so on. And we've never studied any of this in depth that we know of. So it's a big project, and we can't get it all done at once. What we've done now is we've created a small group of examples of accessible digital assets with captioning, description, captioned games, and digital documents. And the captions are all in Spanish as well as English, because that's one of PEEP's goals. We've created a series of how-to documents that will be available soon that are sort of aimed at teachers and parents who might want to try doing some captioning or audio description or other kinds of accessible documents for themselves. And then most importantly, we've piloted a research methodology, and we're in search right now of funding to do a larger research study. So with a very small number of students, we tried out some methodology for measuring engagement of non-traditional students with disabilities with traditional accommodations. So that's something that we'll be hearing more about shortly. I'll close just by saying thank you so much for having me. This is an amazing community, and I'm really grateful to be here and to have the chance to learn from all of you this week. And I hope we have maybe just a minute or two for questions. 2 minutes. 2 minutes. One question. Oh, Andrew has a question.
For the graphical material, have you given any thought to producing raised line diagrams, or at least the code that people could download, or something like that? Thanks.
That's a really interesting idea. Raised line diagrams could be useful for some of these. We don't have the expertise in-house, but that's something we should think about. In the past, we've done some research. When we were doing our STEM description research, we did some trials with raised line drawings as well as image description, and we found that the drawings didn't perform as well as we would have liked. We think this is because students don't have enough training in how to read a raised line diagram, and there's a lot of variation in quality and style. So it's not something that we tend to rely on, but it's certainly a good thought to keep in mind, and I should think about whether some of these resources would be really, really more successful that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Madeleine.